If we then go and we look at Ethereum, I think this was probably one of two major, maybe not shocking, but just counterintuitive data points, which was that Ethereum consistently draws 25 to 25% of developers coming to Web3. And I think that what was kind of counterintuitive to it is, if you think about the long tail, there's just so many projects. And yet, even though we continuously get, literally thousands at this point, Ethereum still gets 20 to 25% of developers. And so what was kind of your takeaway from looking at this and seeing such a big number on a percentage basis still in that ecosystem?
There do appear to be some network effects here, right? And I think there's obviously, liquidity network effects where if you build something and you're in the Ethereum ecosystem by virtue of it having so much liquidity and so many protocols that you can integrate with, that's a real thing. And from a developer perspective, what do developers care about? They want to have either reach or they want to make money. And so if you have a thing that where all the money sits, then it makes a lot of sense that people would come in, right? And that's where you would start. The other thing I think that was kind of an interesting takeaway through the report was there's actually appears to be this ecosystem that's developing around developer tooling. And so, how do you actually write code and ship it in the crypto and Web3 ecosystem? There's some software tooling that you need as a developer, right? And Ethereum has started to build some of those network effects out. And so other chains now have started to catch on to that. And they said, oh, well, Ethereum virtual machine compatibility and tooling compatibility is actually a way to bring developers in. And so if you look at, chains like Avalanche or Celo or Near, they've realized that what you need to do is have, or Polygon, you need some kind of EVM compatibility. And so I think the other takeaway here is there might actually be some network effects on the developer side because of all the tooling that Ethereum has built out over the last 3 to 4 years, that the Ethereum ecosystem has built out, which makes it easy for new devs to come in and get up to speed.
Yeah. Now, speaking of new ones that are coming in that are not going to Bitcoin or Ethereum, you've got kind of a stack rank list of both the 10 fastest growing total monthly developers and then the 10 fastest full-time monthly developers. And neither Bitcoin nor Ethereum are on these lists. How do you interpret this data? So we've got, in this first one, Phantom, Solana, Internet Computer, Near, Terra, Harmony, Algorand, Avalanche, Chainlink, Polygon. All ones that are generally popular, are well known by people who spend time paying attention to the crypto community. But what do you all at Electric do when you see this? Does this mean like you go and you try to invest in all of them or something else?
It's a good question. I saw, there's a great tweet somebody did where we had this slide, something like this slide last year. And somebody said, hey, I just went and bought all the things that you guys said were really fast growing last year. And, thank you, basically. So we don't do that. We don't just go buy all these things. But for us, this is an interesting place to go poke around and say, what's happening here? If we don't already, we already, as we disclosed in the report, we do hold some positions in some of the tokens that we mentioned in the report. We're seed investors in some of these projects, for example, because we're generally early stage investors. But yeah, we'll go take a look at these, and every now and then something pops in here and you're like, wow, that's a surprise. Like I wouldn't have expected that. And so we'll go pay attention to those. But, from our perspective, this is just one of the things you would want to look at, right? We'll go look at what are the developers actually doing? Is the tech real? Is it real projects, or is it a bunch of copy paste code from some other ecosystem and it's not really people that are pushing the boundaries of what's possible? Are they actually taking advantage of what's possible natively on that chain? Because a lot of these layer ones make technical trade-offs about the reason they exist is they're saying, hey, look, Ethereum is not so great for certain use cases, and we're going to make a bunch of technical trade-offs at the layer one so that we can build new kinds of stuff. And then the question is, well, are developers actually going and building those new kinds of things? What is the caliber of those teams? Are they going to stick around? Are they good enough to attract independent funding, right? Or is it a bunch of sort of copy paste kind of code? And once if we're like in a bear market now, if the bear market comes, do all these people leave? So there's a lot of other stuff you have to consider before you just sort of go buy things that are fast growing here. But it is a signal that we can consider to say, hey, is something happening here, and are there any surprises? And we should go pay attention because this, like I said, this is to us really early signal that real value is going to get created, right? Because price may not track. I mean, we've seen that in crypto, right? It's like price may not actually track with real value creation. And so if you want to build something durable, right? Think back to 2017, think about the number of things that were in the top 10 or the top 20 that aren't even around anymore. And so if you want to build something that's going to be around for 10, 20, 30 years, this is sort of one of the signals we want to look at. And so yeah, we'll take it pretty seriously. We'll go, there were a couple in here that were surprised to us, and we'll go poke around with them.
You had a chart that showed that there was essentially 5 different ecosystems that were growing faster than Ethereum did at this point in their kind of maturity. So Polkadot, Solana, Near, BSC, Avalanche, and Terra. So I guess 6 of them. What you really try to do here is not just say, hey, who's growing the fastest at this moment? It's based on inception to today, kind of days, since inception, who's growing the fastest, and all of these were growing faster. Now, how much of this is dependent on kind of like, mobile benefited from the creation of the internet, crypto's benefiting from internet penetration, and like you kind of sequentially need it, versus you can read something more into it than just, no, Ethereum was first, brought a bunch of people in, and now those people are kind of spreading out across these ecosystems.
So I think there are two big takeaways for me here. So one is there was this window, starting a lot of these projects were sort of, the inception of them was like 2017, 2018, and then they launched kind of like 2019, 2020. And what you see here, I think, is that there was a window of time where a lot of people were coming in and saying, well, maybe I want to make different technical trade-offs, or maybe I want to, build on a certain different chain because of the geography that I'm in or whatever reason. These ecosystems have been able to bootstrap, faster than Ethereum. And kind of back to your earlier point where you're talking about exponential growth. You play this forward and if you were 2 years into Ethereum, if you were in 2017 and you saw the Ethereum numbers, you might look at it and say, maybe this thing's real or maybe it's not. And the growth rate kept continuing. And we have, what Ethereum is today, which is remarkable. And so in some sense, it's a way to quantify this intuition of like, well, if this growth continues, where could they be in a few years? And what would that feel like, right? And you might look at this chart and you might say, well, a lot of these things feel like they might be as big as Ethereum one day, right? Like that's kind of the trajectory that they're on. They feel today like Ethereum felt, 3 years ago, which is an amazing thing, right? That there are actually going to be potentially be multiple ecosystems that could be that meaningful. Because I consider Ethereum a meaningful ecosystem at this point, right? If you just look at the amount of innovation that's happening. The second takeaway for me is it is so impressive that Ethereum was able to do this without Ethereum. Right, like a lot of these ecosystems are able to bootstrap off of Ethereum, like you were saying about mobile and the internet. So a lot of these guys are able to bootstrap because Ethereum exists, right? Like BSC, you can port a bunch of code over, for example. And so Ethereum sort of paved the way in a lot of ways here. And so to me, it's very, very impressive that Ethereum not only was able to have this growth, but able to sustain this growth in an era where actually not only was there no Ethereum to bootstrap off of, but the absolute number of developers in the space was way smaller too, right? Because the y-axis here is number of developers. And so Ethereum was able to do this in a market size that was much, much, much smaller 3-4 years ago. So it's to me is remarkable that and it sort of gets at, I think, how special Ethereum is too, that they were able to do this. This ecosystem was able to emerge when the whole sort of market size was so much smaller 3 or 4 years ago.
When you look at something like this chart here, one thing that jumps out to mind is the Ethereum growth looks much more parabolic than, let's say, maybe the Polkadot growth, which looks more linear, but still Polkadot ahead of where Ethereum was at this moment. Do you read in at all to kind of parabolic versus linear growth? Or is that more so just us trying to outsmart ourselves as humans and we see visualizations on a chart? Like, how important is the difference?
Visualizations as humans are really interesting, right? Because you kind of get these intuitions for stuff when you look at visuals and you're like, that feels like it's slowing down, right? And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, you look at the BSC numbers there. Versus, you look at Near and Solana, right? That blue line and that yellow line, and it kind of feels like they're still sort of, inflecting, right? It feels like they're still kind of going up this curve. I think there's a little bit of truth to that. And so, the takeaway from me is you're on this trajectory. Can you maintain it? And it's actually very, very, very hard to maintain it. Kind of, the same reason Ethereum or Bitcoin are no longer in the top 10 fastest growing. It's because when the numbers get large, it's harder to grow 100% from a large base, right? It's harder to keep that compounded growth up. And so I would actually be surprised if all of these ecosystems were able to keep up that kind of growth. I think looking at it and eyeballing and saying, okay, that feels like maybe it's slowing down a little bit, or, wow, that's really accelerating, or wow, that's really keeping up. I think those intuitions are actually really important, especially because, as an early stage investor, as a venture investor, so much of it is gut feel. And so looking at some of the data and saying, is it actually slowing down? It feels like it might be. I think it's actually an important signal to then go poke on and prod on, right? It's like, why might that be the case? Is it because fewer people are coming in? Is it because people are churning out? Is it, what's going on? So it prompts a bunch of questions too. But yeah, I think, your read of the data, I think is basically right. And my takeaway is like, it'll be really interesting when we do this again in a year to see which of these things actually maintain that growth, especially, if we enter another bear market. I think that's where rubber meets road, right? It's like, can you actually retain these people and do they stick around in your ecosystem? And do you continue to grow if the prices go down?